500 years ago, during the Renaissance, a poet and playwright named Christopher Marlowe wrote one of the most famous plays you have probably never heard of. It was called The Tragical History of the Life and Death of Dr. Faustus, about a brilliant scholar who is obsessed with gaining more knowledge and mastery over the world. Faustus masters science, medicine, logic, theology, and law, but none of it satisfies his appetite for more, so he turns to the only remaining discipline left unexplored: magic. Faustus begins practicing the dark arts, and with these powers, he eventually strikes up a deal with Lucifer himself. In exchange for his soul, Faustus purchases 24 years of nearly absolute power. However, in the years that follow, Faustus does surprisingly little with this power. He doesn't help people. He doesn't end poverty. He doesn't establish world peace. Instead, he uses it for small and vain thrills. And then at the end of his 24-year term, he suddenly realizes the terrible truth of what he has done. Desperate to escape the consequences of the deal, he considers turning to Jesus for help, but he hesitates a moment too long. In the final scene of the play, Faustus is dragged off stage by demons, and his body is torn to shreds. This play is where we get the term Faustian bargain. It has become the inspiration for countless books and movies, each delivering the same cautionary message. When you make a deal with the devil, you lose much more than you gain. With that, I want to welcome you to this 6-part series called The Cost of Control. My name is Sharon Hottie Miller, and I am a wife, a mom, an author, and co-pastor at Bright City Church in Durham, North Carolina. And I want you to join me in taking a deeper look at why we control, the areas of our life that we control, what it is costing us, and finally, the real power that God promises us instead. We are going to hear from women who share about their own struggles with control and the truth that we are going to observe again and again and again throughout our time together. The truth that inspired Marlowe's centuries-old story about Faustus is this: whenever we reach for control to save us, it always comes with a cost. In whatever area of your life that you struggle to crave control, whether it is your family, your career, or your health, the axiom that I want you to take from this series is that whenever we try to control something that God has not given us to control, it is a devil's deal that always comes with a cost. It creates anxiety in us and brokenness all around us. Thankfully, the answer to this is not simply to let go and let God. Instead, God has granted us a different kind of power. But before we get to that, let's kick off our time together by hearing from Bren and her own struggle with control.
In high school, I was a golfer and I loved it. It was my passion. Everything I did revolved around golf. And you have control over what you do as a golfer. To have this swing technique, this repetition, so that when you're in tournament play, you know exactly what you need to do. And I was putting that illusion into my whole life, that I had control over everything and what would happen next. I was determined to play college golf, whatever that may look like. Doors kept getting shut. I kept sending letters to coaches and just things that just kept shutting and shutting. But I busted down doors and I did it anyway. And God ended up leading me to Texas Tech, where I played. I got a scholarship and was playing and improving, and there was just so much anxiety and tension and just unrest. And then spring semester of my sophomore year, I got injured in a golf tournament, actually. I tore all these ligaments in my wrist, and I was just so crushed. And I went through a season of just darkness, and I suffered from depression, and I just had to work through a lot that took years to overcome. I realized that I took something that God could have used and I held tightly to it. I made it an idol, and I made it into a plan that put me in control instead of the Lord. Christmas break, I was still in the middle between surgeries and rehab, and normally every single break I had, I was playing in golf tournaments. So because I was injured, I couldn't. I had the opportunity to go on a mission trip with my church and another organization, and God just took hold of my heart, and he led me to apply to the organization that I had traveled with, and I got the job. But the sweetest part is that my boss at the time introduced me to my now husband, and we have 3 sweet, wonderful children. And I just look at God's goodness and his mercy. Even though I tried to make something happen, he knew that's not what was best for me. My house is pure chaos these days with 3 little people. There are toys everywhere, and there's marker on the walls, and it looks kind of like a disaster. But there's peace because we give our home and our family to the Lord, because I've experienced the other side of that, and I don't want to do that again because that is painful. I want to sit in the Lord's will, and that is better than anything I could ever come up with.
Bryn was caught in a cycle that many of us find ourselves at some time or another. Her need for control created anxiety. So she treated her anxiety with more control. It's a cycle that is easy for us to fall into because control offers us a false gospel. It promises security and power and peace, but as Bryn's story demonstrates, it cannot deliver on this promise. Instead, it delivers the opposite. When we reach for control to save us, it always comes with a cost. And this is not a maybe or sometimes. This isn't always. It is virtually a law of the universe, as reliable as the sun. How do I know this? Because it was written into the fabric of creation the moment sin entered the world. Going back to the beginning of the Bible in Genesis 3, Adam and Eve are enjoying perfect freedom and perfect peace. They have no anxiety, no fear, no loss, no pain. But do you know what else they have? No control. They are not in charge. God had given them one limitation on their knowledge and their power. You are free to eat from any tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. For when you eat from it, you will certainly die. This single boundary became the sticking point between their wills and God's, and seeing this, Satan pounced. Genesis 3 verses 4 through 5 tells us that Satan lied to them, saying, "No, you will certainly not die. In fact, God knows that when you eat it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." With these words, Satan laid the blueprint for a scam he's been running ever since. The lie that any gap in our knowledge, any boundary on our power, or any limitation on our choice is something to fear, to challenge, and to resist. It's a deception that Adam and Eve fell for, and we are still falling for today. Instead of entrusting ourselves to God's goodness, we believe our own control will serve us better. What immediately followed this rebellious act in Genesis was anxiety, shame, and division. And we reenact this scene again and again every time we grasp for control today. This, in a nutshell, is why we are so tempted to control. This temptation is integrally tied to the original brokenness of the world. It is where it all began, and we inherited it from them. Now, I know this is a heavy note to start on. The cost of control. It is heavy. It is not inspiring. But the reason I'm starting here with you is that this is where it started for me. Like many of you, I wrestle with control. I struggle with wishing I could control my husband, my kids, my circumstances, my church. And in the past, when I noticed myself doing this, I would always say to myself, you need to stop doing this. You need to release this. You need to let go. But the problem was, saying this to myself did not help at all. It only settled into my brain as a spiritual should that I was constantly failing to do. What actually helped me was finally recognizing that when I turn to control to fix something, I will always and only break it more. And this realization is what actually motivated me to stop. Now, when I am pressuring my husband to make a decision that I think he should make, I now think I can keep doing this, but it is going to cost my marriage. It is going to fracture our intimacy. It is going to damage our unity. When I am trying to change the mind of someone in my church or in my life, I now think I can keep doing this, but it is going to give me anxiety. It is going to keep me lying awake at night, and it is going to strain my relationship with them. When I try to engineer an outcome, when I try to insert myself into a situation where I don't belong, when I manipulate, pressure, or coerce, I can keep doing it because I think my way is best, but it is going to damage my relationships, my credibility, and my mental health. This realization was a game changer for me. This was the moment I realized that in these situations, I have a choice to make. I can reenact the garden and all the consequences it wrought, or I can look back a little earlier in Genesis, before sin entered the world, and reclaim the power that humanity possessed before we squandered it with our craving for control. In these 6 sessions, I'm going to take you on the journey that I have been on myself. We are going to do kind of a biopsy of control, looking at the different ways we exert control, what it is costing us in different areas of our lives, and then conclude our time together by looking at the real power God promises. Now, fair warning, we are going to spend the majority of these sessions examining the problem. And only in the 6th and final session will we get to the solution. And while that emphasis might seem lopsided, the reason I am focusing so heavily on the cost is this. Whether you are watching this video on your own with a group or digging deeper into my book, my hope for you is that you learn about the cost of control in your life, that the Holy Spirit will open your eyes to this truth. You don't have to live this way. You don't have to reenact Genesis 3 forever and ever and ever. You don't have to burden yourself with the crushing anxiety of trying to control something you cannot control. You don't have to fracture and strain your relationships by trying to control them. Jesus came to earth and died to set you free from that cost. So my prayer for you through this series is that you will develop such a distaste for the consequences of control that you will turn back to the true source of security, not out of spiritual obligation, but a desire to be truly free.